All right, everyone, welcome back to a plate full of insights. We have another awesome episode for you today. Today, we're going to continue a little bit of the conversation that we started in the last episode. Hopefully, the ordering of the episodes ends up being the way that I'm describing it right now. That would make me look a little funny. So we have Marina back with us. Thanks for joining us again, Marina. This is fun.
Thanks for
I'm
having
glad
me.
glad we could have you again. Uh,
Yeah,
Today we're going to talk about a really, I would say, underappreciated topic in many aspects. We're going to go through how does mental health impact nutrition for women. Now, of course, we're going to go beyond that a little bit. We're going to not just hyper focus on nutrition. There's lifestyle factors involved here. But the gist of it, that's where we're going to spend our time today. And what better person to have join us than Marina? As if you haven't checked out the other episode where we talked about fertility, that one should be the one prior to this one. Go check that one out as well. That was Marina's first episode on this podcast, and she did awesome. So go check it out. Um, yeah, let's dive in. Ready to get into it?
absolutely. Thank you
Okay,
for that great introduction. I'm
awesome.
excited to be back.
Alrighty, so it's I feel like probably the most obvious question to ask as I try and not pull my headphone cord out of where it's supposed to be. Um, why is it important to talk about mental health for women? I feel so silly asking that question. It's like, why is it important to talk about this? It's like, well, no shit, it's important. But why is it important from your perspective? Um, why is it important?
Well, I think the question should actually be why women specifically? I mean, mental health is important to talk about for everyone, but why especially women, right? And the reason for that is because there is a higher prevalence of mental health issues in women than men, almost 3 times higher, which is very significant. And women are less likely to seek help than men. Women are nurturers by nature. We carry the burden of not just ourselves, but our families, our coworkers, our friends, our just everyone we know. We want to fix it all. And sometimes we put ourselves on the back burner,
Hmm? I've
right?
heard that before. Back burner.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we want to address these issues openly so that we can reduce that stigma and encourage women to seek help and get the support that they need.
Yeah, and when you put it like that, I've the clients that I've worked with in the past have mentioned that before, but I didn't know that stat that you mentioned, 3 times higher. That's
Mhm.
absolutely wild. Now, I would expect that I mean, you kind of alluded to reasons why people might put themselves on a back burner. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are so many factors involved. So there's, societal pressures, there's gender roles, life experiences. There's so many things that can affect a woman, women's mental health and well-being. Think about it. At every stage, there's something going on, right? If you're, just start finishing studies and you're starting work, you're stressed about that. You have a friend who's going through some issues, you're stressed about that. You're stressed about feeding your family, you're stressed about taking care of your aging parents, you're stressed about so many different things, right? And it all comes together, and men have this ability to compartmentalize, and that works in their favor sometimes, in that, once they're done one thing, they can move on to the next and they're good to go. I'm speaking generally, of course, there's a little bit of everything in there, but most of the time that's how it works. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's, from the research and the readings that I've been doing, that's usually how it is. Women, on the other hand, everything kind of gets meshed in there like spaghetti, right? You have everything all working at once, and you feel this. this overwhelming stress, and you sometimes have a hard time pinpointing what it is exactly. It's because it's everything all at once.
I would agree with you. I mean, obviously, there's nuance. Um, we can't blanket statement everything, but at the same time, I think a lot of the pieces that you mentioned around, societal pressures, people's upbringings, all of those things make it something like, oh, why don't you just, seek help for it, kind of thing, which is the next piece around why it's important to talk about it out in the open. And we're just one platform, so I mean, we try and reach as many people as we can. But in general, there's barriers that sometimes you can't see to accessing help in this area, right?
Well, there's financial constraints. I mean, it's hard sometimes when, as a mom myself and someone who understands the burdens of being a mom. um, as beautiful as it is a bit of a burden because you're always worried about your kids. Always. There's not a moment in time when you're not thinking of them. And sometimes it comes to, do I send my kids to camp, or do I go and seek mental health help? Right? And so, especially now with the economy as it is, everyone's going through some financial burdens. Caregiving. Do I take time out of work, or do I take time away from my kids to go seek the help that I need, or do I give them what they need first?
Yeah, one could potentially say it's a conflicting priorities potentially.
Mhm.
And not to say
Yeah,
that in a bad way, but I mean, you have priorities in other areas, and you got to make a choice as to which one you do, because sometimes you can't do both.
exactly. And that's why I'm here today, is because I always tell my clients, you can't fill from an empty cup. So if you're not taking care of yourself first, how can you take care of others? You're going to be frazzled all the time. And don't get me wrong, I'm like that sometimes too. But taking that time, exactly. Taking that time for self-care and giving yourself what your body needs will help you to be more efficient in your other responsibilities.
Yeah, totally. I laughing because joke could have been on me if there was actually something in that mug. Oh man, that wouldn't have that wouldn't have gone as planned. But yes, you can't. And I've had that conversation with clients too about like if you spend even a bit of time on this, like it's an investment of sorts. Whatever analogy that you want to use, but I mean it is.
Absolutely, 100%.
All right. So we know why we're here. Hopefully, everybody listening and watching knows why we're here. As if we have to really, rationalize that a ton. But it's still good to understand the context and everything. For those that may not be aware of all of these pieces, hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of a taste of some of those things. Let's dive into our specialty, of course, being nutrition.
Yeah.
How does uh, nutrition impact women's mental health? Speaking, and there's probably a two-way street there. I know there is for sure. But
Mhm.
nutrition's impact. So nutrition doing the things for women's mental health.
Yeah, so like you said, it is a two-way street. Nutrition does affect mental health, but mental health also affects our nutrition and our ability to feed ourselves and what we feed ourselves. But we know that in nutrients like omega-3s and your B vitamins, your antioxidants, so any of those like really rich dark colors in foods, really support that brain function and help with mood regulation, help with hormonal balance. We know that foods like whole grains and proteins and lots of fruits and vegetables can also help stabilize that energy. And when we're full, when we're satisfied, we're not hangry. It does help to stabilize that mood and help us to get to what we're to do what we're doing throughout the day.
I mean, you're feeding the brain is. such a power hungry, resource heavy organ. And I mean, if you're not fueling that adequately, that's where things like decision making becomes more challenging. Your tolerance to making those decisions and navigating things throughout the day, energy levels, all that stuff. I mean, yeah, totally. Um, you mentioned some key nutrients in there. Can we dive into those a little bit?
Yeah, so I mentioned omega-3. Omega-3 we know is really important for brain health, and we find those in, fatty fish like salmon, walnuts, mackerel, those types of things. There's also a little bit in chia seed or flaxseed. Most people don't get enough omega-3 though, so that's where we would use supplement if necessary. There are some B vitamins that help with mood as well. But vitamin D is the one that I really want to highlight, especially for women. Not only because it plays a role in bone health and it helps to strengthen our bones, but also because it helps with mood. So vitamin D helps to synthesize dopamine, which is our happy hormone. And unfortunately, here in Canada, we only have a few short months where our bodies can synthesize vitamin D from the sun. Most of the year, we're at a latitude where we don't have the right wavelength for our bodies to synthesize that vitamin D in our skin. So we do need to supplement. We're lucky though that some foods are fortified, like milk or margarine or fortified orange juice. Those are pretty much the only sources of vitamin D. So again, that's why it's really important to take that vitamin D supplement daily.
Now, I know a question probably floating around in people's heads that are listening is all these nutrients, and you mentioned some that are good to supplement with, like omega 3s, vitamin D. Those are tricky to obtain in the diet.
Mhm.
But the natural question that comes out of this is, ooh, if I just take a high dose of all of these in a supplement form, will everything just get better? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, just like everything else in life, right? You can't, if you eat too much broccoli, it's not going to make you healthier. If you eat too much of anything or take too much of anything, it's not going to make things better. There are other factors involved. So it's important to look at all factors together when considering an issue.
I would expect this area not to be too much different with a lot of the other areas in nutrition around supplementation, being that supplementation can really correct a deficiency or an insufficiency. In the short term, obviously, trying to find a way to correct that via food intake if possible. In the medium to longer term, but there's even research that continuously comes out that looks at nutrients coming from food versus supplements and the effect on things like energy levels, mood, and whatever else. And continuously, the same things coming from food has more of an impact, positive impact, which would suggest there's maybe something else going on there, like you mentioned. So
Yeah. Yeah. Food is always, the less is always more, right? So the more we use our food as medicine, the better. We have all these foods available to us, and we're so lucky that we can, import, and most of the time we have things available to us. But using supplements as kind of a backup plan is where we're going. Especially when it comes to vitamin D's, because we're living in a country where we're not getting much of it naturally. And we know that vitamin D affects increases risk for anxiety, depression, seasonal affective disorder. Um, and surprisingly, women are actually more at risk for those disorders than men.
makes sense.
Mhm.
Is there an amount for vitamin D supplement that you suggest?
The minimum recommended is 400 international units, but we can go up to 1,000. So somewhere within that range is typically all you need.
Okay. I'm sure that scratches only the surface of these areas. Well, let's move on to the next piece, and talk about something more specific, such as stress levels. Huh? How does diet for women impact stress levels? What can we do there?
So this is another one of those things where it's a cycle. Diet can influence stress, but stress can also influence diet. When we're stressed out, especially long term, especially if it's chronic stress, we release a lot of cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And cortisol increases our appetite, increases our cravings for the high fat, high sugar foods. If you think of the last time you were stressed out, what were some of the things that you reached for? Right? Most people will go for that, chocolate or chips or candy or something. They call it comfort foods. And yeah, sure, it does comfort in the short term. Makes us feel good a little bit while we're eating it. But then after that, what actually happens is that those foods cause a dip in our energy levels because they're, metabolized super quick. They're not really fueling our bodies. So what ends up happening is that we feel more stressed out and then we eat more and we crave it more and then it goes on and on and on. So
That's a
the
nice
best
little
way,
circle.
exactly. So the best way to break that cycle is to number one, eat a healthy, balanced diet, and number two, to find ways to cope with that stress.
Yeah, and also I think appreciating um, why those particular foods come into mind when somebody's stressed, because I know some people when they're stressed they eat less, some people eat more, some people their appetite goes away, but then they only focus on certain things, and there's probably reasons for this, and it's maybe worth spending time figuring out why.
Mm-hmm.
But those are all I mean I it happens with everybody to some extent that I've worked with. It's different obviously for different people, but it is very relevant. But also I think worth mentioning how, like, obviously there's other things that could be done in the moment, but there's things that you can do to impact things upstream, or to prevent or at least lower the intensity of, which is stuff that could happen beforehand, instead of only relying on willpower in the moment, which is a strategy
Yes.
that is bludgeoned to death of, I just need better willpower.
Yeah, and honestly, in that moment, it's hard. It's hard to have that control and say, no, I'm not going to have it because you know that it's going to give you that immediate comfort that you're looking for,
Totally. Yeah,
right?
totally. But
Mhm.
stress impacts other things too,
Mhm.
which probably ends up being in a circle as well.
It does.
There's a theme here you can probably recognize, right? It's all connected. Sleep. There's an impact of sleep here. Um, what's going on with stress and sleep in this area?
Okay, so I want you to imagine with me, okay? You are a mom, you have, little kids that who need you. You wake up early in the morning so that you can pack their school bags, get their breakfast ready, get them dressed, ready for school. You take them to school, you start work, then you rush back to pick them up after work. You take them to activities, get dinner on the table, give them their baths, get them, sign their papers for school, all of those things. And then once they're in bed, after they've woken up, a million times for, or what seems like a million times, asking for, I need another hug, I need another cuddle or a drink of water. And then you look around and your house is a mess. So then you say, okay, I need to tidy up. So then you spend all this time tidying up. And then before you know it, it's past your bedtime and you have a million things on your mind, worrying about the next day and your to do list for the next day. How can you possibly sleep?
Yeah, there's a
So
million
this is
dollar
a
question.
very typical day. That's not even including any of the craziness that might happen throughout the day.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you add in variables like workplace, school, for yourself potentially,
Hmm.
all those other things, life, um, that are not even family related. Heck, uh,
Yeah.
it sounds exhausting. That's just the way that you just described that, which was probably intentional of how you described that. Yeah, no kidding.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So, as we know, it goes without saying that stress does interrupt sleep. But then what do we do when stress can interrupt sleep, increases stress, and poor sleep increases stress levels? What do we do? How do we break that cycle? Right? So we know that cortisol, again, our stress hormone, interferes with ability not only to fall asleep, because sometimes it's easy for us to fall asleep after we've been exhausted all day, but it also affects our quality of sleep and our ability to stay asleep. So then when we wake up in the morning, it hasn't been a restful sleep. We wake up exhausted still from the previous day, and then it goes on.
Yep.
So what do
And
we
on
do?
and on and on and on.
Exactly. Exactly. It's overwhelming sometimes.
Yep. But that's a good question to ask. What can you do?
So again, it goes back to that self-care, filling your cup, making sure to take time at least an hour before bed to kind of wind down, journal, create a to-do list so you're not having those racing thoughts throughout the day or throughout the night. Making sure to have a plan in motion, because when we don't have a plan, we end up thinking about it at night subconsciously,
Hmm.
right?
Because if you don't think about it, then you might forget it. If you didn't
Exactly.
document anything anywhere other than in your mind, there is a
Yes.
fear of losing that information subconsciously for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
I like to keep a notepad and paper right beside my bed so that if there's anything on my mind, I can just jot it down and forget it. And that works really well. I've actually shared that with so many women, and once they try it, they're like, "Oh yeah." It's, once you write it down, it's out of mind.
Oh, that's not going to work that much. I don't, and give it a whirl. What can you lose, right? What can you lose?
Exactly. Journaling can be so therapeutic, especially as we talked about, women tend to have a jumble of, stressors that they're thinking about at any given time. So if you write down all your stressors, whether it's big or small, big things could be, of course, like finances, kids, health troubles, that kind of thing. Small things could be like, I went to the grocery store, didn't find an ingredient that I needed, right? But it all get accumulates and it all adds up. And so writing things down like that can be really helpful in that you can say, okay, well, this thing doesn't really matter as much. I can cross it off. And the act of actually crossing it off your list will help you cross it out of your mind as well.
True, true. Don't want to go down this rabbit hole because this is a thing that could spend a lot of time. But um, there is also the chance too that the act of writing down those pieces
Hmm.
could what's the word, kind of validate and make them more real, which sometimes may not be the most enjoyable experience of going through that process. Um, maybe it may be
Yeah.
easier and maybe a nicer experience to just scroll through TikTok when you're laying in bed, so that you can try and distract yourself from those pieces. But then ultimately, once you shut it off, it's gonna come right back.
Exactly. Exactly. And you're right. Sometimes it makes it more real, but it also provides an opportunity to think of, what do I have control over and what don't I have control over? Right? So if it's something like finances, well, maybe I can talk to somebody, maybe I can, budget, maybe I can, move things around a little bit, so think of it, thinking of a kind of like a game plan, to help you work through it. And then that way say, okay, I have a plan for this. I don't have any more control at this moment, so I'm just going to let it be for now.
Yeah, makes sense.
Mhm.
Let's get into, so we kind of touched on a few things to help reduce stress. Is there any others that come to mind in terms of, and it could be at around time for sleep. It could be elsewhere because I'm definitely, there's things earlier in the day that, if done, could also help things later in the day around sleep too.
Yeah, so mindful eating and paying attention to those hunger cues, making sure that we're paying attention to what we have on our plate. Oftentimes, again, with our busy lifestyles, we're just eating as we are working, or eating in the car, or eating, wherever we get a chance. And sometimes that can actually increase our stress because we're not really being mindful of how much we're eating and what we're putting into our bodies. So that's a big one. Like I said, practicing self-care, whether it's doing some yoga, going for a walk, talking to a good friend, anything, coloring even, right? Any of those things, whatever works for you. So everyone is so different.
Building
Um,
Legos.
yes, something to just get your mind off of things and help you relax. And then during the day, diaphragmatic breathing works wonders because what that does is it pushes oxygen to your brain, to your heart, helps you to release that tension in your body.
Hmm.
Right? So our bodies tell us that we're stressed in so many different ways, whether it's, the clenched jaw, and sometimes you'll get that tension in the jaw. Sometimes it's in the neck. Sometimes you'll feel your core muscles very tight, or your shoulders. For some people, it's the calves. So many different ways that your body is telling you that you're stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so practicing that diaphragmatic breathing often throughout the day. And it's just that 10-10-10 rule where you're inhaling for 10 seconds, holding it for 10 seconds, and releasing for 10 seconds. And getting the oxygen out to your body can help you to release those muscles and feel more relaxed. The other
Sounds
great thing about it is that you could do it pretty much anywhere and
right.
at
You
any
can.
time. Hmm.
Hopefully not while driving. Probably not the most appropriate to do while driving, but in general, I would agree with you. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot that you can do. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, it's, you can get creative with. That's why I yanked out the Lego sunflower. There's a surgence of, kind of like the coloring, the adult coloring books. I've seen a lot of
Mhm.
adults getting into like Legos and stuff now, probably for similar reasons. Um, I would expect,
Yeah.
but yeah, finding a thing. Um,
Yeah, I've been diamond painting, which is very new for me, but I just completed my
Diamond
first
painting.
one. Yeah, they're like these little gems that you put, and it's very therapeutic because they're so small and you have to be very, you know,
Oh
exact about
yeah,
it. Yeah,
that, that's cool.
it is. Yeah. But another big one is sleep hygiene, and what we mean by that is establishing a consistent sleep schedule, right? So when we, sleep 10 o'clock one day and 12 the next, and, sleep in the one day or wake up early the next, it actually affects our circadian rhythm. And that can contribute to our feelings of stress as well. Hmm. So create a relaxing bedtime routine. Make sure that you have that self care as part of it, setting a consistent sleep and wake time, creating that comfortable sleep environment is really important to help you get that sleep that you need to help you cope with that stress.
One of my clients shared a tip with me that is quite relevant, I would say, in today's world where, and people probably heard of the tip, like, don't keep your phone right beside your bed. Um, which is true.
Hmm.
However, they're like, oh, I have to get up out of my, I got to get up out of bed in order to turn my alarm off. So it gets me out of bed, but it also takes your phone away from the side of your bed. So it's not the first thing you grab. Um, But there's an additional piece onto that my client, and it's so obvious too, right? Like when you
Mhm.
think about how we grew up, at least I grew up the age that I am, a lot of us had clocks, like just clocks. They obviously had radios on them, but let's be honest, who used the radio on your alarm clock? Not many people. Um, so, but you had that beside your bed, so you can still tell the time
Mhm.
is right, because there's the
Yeah.
temptation of like, ooh, what time is it? Pick up your phone, and then 50% chance of let's see what else is on there. Um, if you're going to try that strategy, I'd encourage you spend $20, get a clock for the side of your bed, so you can use that for your alarm or telling the time, so you don't have to be tempted.
Mhm.
Because that's still, of course, knowing what time it is, so you don't sleep in when you set alarms and stuff for yourself is still helpful.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a really good point. And actually, if I can add to that, just even turning on your blue light filter on your devices can also help with sleep quality,
Mm-hmm.
because blue light from devices can affect sleep quality. So even if you still fall asleep, you're not getting that restful deep sleep.
Mm.
So usually, 2 hours before bed, turn that on. That way, even if you're scrolling your phone or looking at something, then you have that blue light filter and it's not affecting your sleep as much.
So hopefully somebody listening found one little nugget in that list of stuff that you can play around with. And ultimately, there's no manual with any of this. There's no rule book.
Mhm.
Um, you may hate Legos. That's fine. Find something else to do. It doesn't matter to me what you do there. Try and find some. Um, let's come back around as we come to the end of this episode. Let's come back around to help people again figure out potential barriers that could get in their way. Because I
Mhm.
know after going through that list, there's probably a lot of people sitting there thinking, oh, but I've tried that, didn't work. Oh, but there's so many things that get in my way from being able to do any of the work in this
Yeah.
area. What are some of these barriers?
Well, I think the biggest one for women would be time constraint. Earlier I kind of described what a typical day might look like. And so how do you fit in self-care in the midst of all of this? How do you find time to reach out to a healthcare professional? How do you find time to just even sit with a hot cup of coffee? Oftentimes I have my coffee beside me and running around after the kids, it takes about 2 hours to drink a coffee. I
Got to
finally
microwave
get
it
to it.
3 times?
Yes, and it's cold. I drink it cold. I don't even microwave it anymore.
Fair. I Microwaving it would destroy the taste of it anyways, but
Yeah.
sometimes people still do that. But yes, very valid. Very valid.
Right. Emotional eating can also influence or be a barrier, because it's a cycle and it's hard to break that cycle. So what do we do if we're constantly stressed and we're constantly craving these foods? Those cravings are very intense sometimes. And it's hard to step away from that and say, okay, what are some other options? How do I soothe myself without turning to food?
Yeah, all the time. And
Hmm.
especially if that's one of the few things that actually does something for somebody.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
who's us to sit here and say, I got to try and find another strategy, when if you're thinking when we thinking seemingly logically in the moment, you're like, but this works. Why do I
Hmm.
need to find something else? This works, right? Obviously there's nuance there, but it's a fair point, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, these foods, when you eat them, they also release that dopamine hormone, our happy hormone. And so in that moment, it does work. The science has proved it does work, but only in the short term. And most of the time, people will feel guilty about eating these foods afterwards because they know it's not fueling their bodies. And they'll come and say, I feel terrible for eating this. I'm not going to do this again. And then by the time, the next day comes around, you're having those same cravings again, and then the cycle goes on.
Yep, fair. Any other barriers come to mind?
Sometimes it's cultural or familial food preferences. Just this is the way I've grown up. I'm a and potatoes kind of person, right? I hear that a lot. Or, I every night it's a family tradition. We sit down, watch a movie, and have some popcorn, or whatever it may be, right? So sometimes those can be barriers as well.
I mean, so it's good to, if you're thinking about, oh, I want to work on this, I want to find a way to change how I eat, emotional eating habits. That was a disaster way of explaining that. The words were not coming to my brain. Um, Doing more than just saying, oh, I want to make a change here. I want to not do this as much anymore. You got to take it further than that. You got to think, okay, well, if you're not going to do this, what else is it going to be? Because if you
Mhm.
just take something away or reduce something, and given that the potential effects that it was having emotionally for the people around you, socially, culturally, and you don't find something else to put in its place, you're going to notice a void there. And if you don't spend
Mhm.
time thinking about other alternative strategies, you're just going to come back to what you were doing before, which is probably not what you're wanting to do anyways. But if you don't think about it as opposed to just hoping something will naturally happen, then that's might be where you're going to end up.
Exactly. Exactly. And an interesting tidbit that I recently came across is that a 10-second hug from someone you love actually releases the same amount of dopamine, if not more.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, there are other ways to find that comfort that are not food related. Taking a warm bath, talking to someone that you trust, getting that hug from someone that you love, whether it's a spouse or your children or someone,
hmm
um, that can go a long way in creating that comfort and um, adding to that self care.
Totally. Well, I bet there may be a few people, probably more, sitting here going, "Oh, how do I get started here?" And um, so the last question that I want to send your way is: at what point should someone seek professional support for mental health or nutrition, either or both?
So if you're finding that you're having these feelings of stress or anxiety, or you're feeling hopeless or overwhelmed or any of those feelings, know that you're not alone. You can get help, and seek help early. There, in the past there may have been that stigma, but we're trying to overcome that stigma and say that it's okay. It's okay to seek help, and it's okay to say that I can't do this alone.
Yep. And there's no better time to do it than whenever you end up doing it. Obviously,
Today, as
earlier is better. Today is
start
good.
today.
Yeah.
Start today. I find, sometimes when we say, okay, I'll get to it tomorrow, tomorrow never comes. There's
Yep.
always going to be a tomorrow. So once
hmm
you decide I need help, that's the day that you call for help.
Yeah. And we can be the ones to help at least get you started with that.
Mhm.
I mean, we're a team of dietitians, but we have connections. We have people on our team that can direct you in certain areas. We're not a one trick shop. That's not the right term. One trick pony. I don't know what the right term is for that, but yeah, if you're not, you don't have to have everything figured for you to start. If you're
Mhm.
confused and scattered, which I know is tricky because I've heard many stories from people that say I've tried to start seeking help, um, but they didn't. The person that was trying to help them wasn't the right fit, and they couldn't make sense of that person's situation, and it ended up making it not a good experience. That then turns into thinking, oh, I need to have all of my shit figured out so that I can then seek help, which doesn't shouldn't be like that. But
Yeah.
we will
Just
not do that at Revive.
No, just come as you are, and we will help you through whatever you need help with. We have connections with mental health counselors and therapists. We have connections with, people who help with exercise. We can direct you to, massage therapists. We need to take that holistic approach and just finding somebody that you trust that you can talk to get you started on this journey is all you need is, just take that first step.
And what better place to leave the episode than there? Thanks again, Marina, for coming, for spending some time with us. Hopefully, everybody listening, watching, wherever you are, found something in this episode helpful. And I very much look forward to having you back again for another episode of something in this world that we can try and make sense for people. It's been a blast. So thanks again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here.